Welcome back to Getting Started with Linux. I'm your host, Daniel Lowrie. Today's episode, we are configuring name resolution. Joining us, as always, the man, the myth, the legend, you know him as Ross Brunson. Ross, glad to have you back. Name resolution, kind of the hot topic, well, at least in this episode, right?
You're right, this one, yeah.
I guess the question on a lot of our minds is, what is it, and how do we use it in Linux?
Right, so one of the problems with name resolution is that there are multiple components. And anybody who's ever used a system, and I love it when users call and they say something like, the internet is down.
My favorite call.
Right, which I always say, the entire internet or just your portion of the internet? What they really mean is, something unexpected happened and I'm not able to get to where I thought I was going to go to. So there's this relationship between the friendly name of something, like the host name, the IP address, and then like the underlying media access control address, the MAC address. Well, most of the time, the name resolution happens via DHCP because it's configured. It doesn't happen that way. It's assigned the right things via DHCP, and then the user just queries it and off they go. Well, let's kind of demystify this just a little bit. Because in this environment, we have three files, which we'll show you a handy graphic later on, but let's talk about them. So we have the etc host file, the etc resolve.conf file without an E, and the etc nsswitch, tab it out, .conf file. Let's take a look at these files in the particular order in which you might encounter them. So when you open up an application, such as a web browser, and type in a domain name that you want to get to, quite a bit of information is passed around on the back end. Now, let's look at the etc nsswitch.conf file, because that file is the one that we're going to start with. And there's one entry in there that's very important, so we'll less the etc nsswitch.conf file, and let's scroll down until we see this particular line. Hosts, files, and DNS. Now, host is the entry that says, when you're looking for host name resolution, where are you going to go and what are you going to look at? If it says files first, that means we're going to go look at the etc host file. That's the local file that typically has 127.0.0.1 local host in it, and it may have others in there, but it's always risky to use the host file because it's easy for it to get out of date. Right? So if you're hard coding addresses in there, now let's say, for example, you're a web developer and you're using XAMPP or MAMP or one of these other tools for doing that, or you might have set it to resolve the main server to your local system and you forget all about that. Okay. So kind of embarrassing.
That never happens, I'm sure.
Kind of embarrassing when somebody says, hey, you know what? The site is doing so-and-so. You're like, no, it's not. Oh, it's on my local machine.
Yeah.
Oops. So let's take a look at this. And now the order is important because if it says files DNS, files gets looked at first. Critical item here. If there is a match for the name that you're looking for in the file etc hosts, even if it's wrong, it won't go on to the next one. If there's not a match in files etc host, it'll switch over and look at a file called the resolve.conf file. So the resolve.conf file has all the way down at the end of it, right here, the name server. So the search and the name server. There will typically be two name servers, a primary and then a failover. This only has one. It's just how DNS or the DHCP was configured. So when we look at this, we know if we fail getting a satisfied lookup on files, etc hosts, will automatically go out and query this name server and say, hey, do you know where this domain is, this host in this domain? And if it resolves back, then it hands it back to the browser, in this case, and we get over there and we do a get of a header on the HTTP, and it starts to pull stuff down.
We like this service.
Yes, it's very good. Yes, we use this a fair amount on the web. Yes. So like every moment of every day. But then if it fails, the first one, it might go to the second one. Okay. So anytime you're in the etc nsswitch.conf and the first one doesn't get a resolution, it goes to the next. If there's another one like NIS after that, it would go to that third one. Now, I just mentioned something incredibly old and not really used anymore, but it can still occur in there. So we've covered the two files. We look at the nsswitch.conf to see what order we're going to look at files and DNS or vice versa. Then we look to see what DNS servers we could use in order to resolve that kind of thing. And then the last thing would be what?
You're asking.
Etsy hosts.
Etsy hosts.
Right, let's look at Etsy hosts. So the Etsy host file should be real simple. There shouldn't be hardly anything in it as far as you're concerned. Really, it's just this line here. And 127.0.0.1 is the local host, so that's the local host address. Many times, if somebody is a web developer and they're doing local host development, they'll have another name right here, such as www.myserver.com, that when they type that into their browser, it goes directly to the web server on the local system. Okay, now let's go ahead and look at a little bit of a graphic here that I think will be very helpful. This is something that I've come up with over many times of trying to explain this. And so this literally lays out the same thing that we just worked through, right? So step number one is the client software says, hey, I need a name resolution. So it goes and it looks at the Etsy nsswitch.conf file. So this one, as I mentioned, NIS. So files. So it looks at the files first. The file is the Etsy host file. Let's say we're looking for Snowcat.
Okay, Snowcat.
Snowcat. Now the host Snowcat, you see Snowblower in there, so there's not a match.
Nope.
So it's going to go back to nsswitch.conf and say, you know, that one failed. What do you got for me next? Why don't you check DNS? Great. So it goes and looks in the Etsy resolve.conf, number 3, finds those two addresses, which this is very common to have a local, on your network version of this. And especially if you're doing something virtualized, it might just be that exact host. And so it's going to go out, it's going to query the DNS server, their number 4, which will check its database for maps, come back with a reply of yes or no. And if it's a no, it might fail. Host not found, can't get there. If it's actually resolved, then you'll go over and start a negotiation between your system and that remote system. So kind of working you through this, right? This is the way that name resolution works on a Linux system by the most part.
Well, it's actually not that difficult once we see what's underneath the hood here, right? Just a couple of files letting it know where to look and how to look for it, and then it's off to the races. Hopefully you find that, and you can get to the website you're looking for. Always great.
And if guys like us and gals like us do our job right, then you as a user never have to worry about it.
That's right.
You don't care.
All right. Well, Ross, thanks for explaining this for us. We appreciate that. Thanks for watching. We got more to come, so stay tuned. Until then, we'll see you next time.